Hi Clashers, this is Toxic Group and today I welcome you to my channel Toxic GameRup. This is the first video, hope you will be liking it. First of all, I am going to tell about myself. I am Mohammad Abrar Jahin, my nickname is Rup, hence where the Toxic Group comes, and I am a Bangladeshi and today this is my first video, so hopefully I will be getting support from you guys. So let's start. First of all, as you can see, this is my profile. So I'll be showing you the clan which I am right now. This is my clan. My clan's name is Team Toxic. And as you can see here, we have all the epic cards, all are requested. This is my clan info. Here, this is my profile. This is currently my deck. This is the second account. This is Nur Jahan. She is my wife and I have made her my leader because of my clan, giving her the honor. And these all, as you can see, these are the different accounts of mine. You can call them my doppelgangers or shadow clone jutsu if you are a fan of Naruto. So guys, you must be wondering how many accounts. Well, there are 48 accounts. So all the 48 accounts, from all the 48 accounts, as you can see, I have requested all the epic cards in Epic Sunday. So that's the trick, guys. With 48 accounts, 48 into 500, you can earn 24,000 of golds. Isn't that awesome? 24,000 golds in one single Sunday. So here my daily donation is 40 out of 260. So I'll be able to donate about 24 times today, and since this resets within 6 minutes, so after that I can again donate 24 times. So this brings a total of 48 times epic donation. So as you can see, I have requested all the different mixture of cards so that my epic doesn't runs out. There are all sort of different epics requested, all Balloons, Carney, Goblin Gang, then Prince, everything. So moving on, let's see, these are all the accounts. Now I'll be telling you how to open this. You can, if you can't open 48 accounts of your own, what you can do is, you can take 3 of your friends. So each of them you create 16 accounts of your own, and with 16 accounts it might take about 2 to 3 weeks. I know it's a lot of difficulty at first, but then again you can create the clan of your own. It will take 2 to 3 weeks, then you will be able to donate all the accounts. This is my deck. This is currently with this deck I have won grand challenge 11 times. There was a slight mistake for which I lost the last match. Well, it doesn't matter really. Here is a custom tournament, I made it for myself, and here it is. This is the deck which I use, and this is the first deck which I use in my ladder. Here you can see my graveyard is level 3, halfway to level 4. Hopefully I will be reaching to level 4 very soon. And this is the shop. The cards I have banded 1 out of 2. Hopefully I'll be purchasing 1 at last. Well, now let me talk about the clan fact. If you create the clan of your own, so if 3 of your friends create this clan within a week or so, you can within 2 weeks maybe you can create 48 accounts with which you can create something like this, and you can donate all the epics that you want. 3 of your friends could earn 24k at one go. So that is it. However, if you are idle, not that much active, I will be telling you a shortcut how you can earn 24k without creating a clan. That will be at the last. So there is not much time left. Maybe I have 3 minutes left. So after 3 minutes my plan, the donation will be resetted. So let me see. Let me go to the first at the top and let me start donating and earn the gold. Well, here I am at the top. Shall I start? I have started. All golds and golds and golds and golds. You don't know how much the sheer amount of satisfaction you get when you will be donating this gold. The sheer pure pleasure of earning the gold. This is not the paid account. The GameRup will also get that much satisfaction, let alone the free to play. This tactics is for free to play only. Well, I have reached my donation limit. Well, I have 1 minute 7 seconds left before I can donate again. I planned this time especially, because so that I can donate at a one go, earn 24k at one go. So there's not much time left. You can see my chest. I know you are desperate to see the chest opening as well, but that's not my first priority. My first priority is donating all the cards. So let me go back to the halfway where I have donated already. Yeah, I'll be donating from the giant skeleton. As you can see, there is not much time left, only 20 seconds, 19, 18, 17. So we have already earned 12,000 golds and the remaining 12,000 will be earning within 10, 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Let's go. Oops. Why? I don't know. Okay, I'll be coming to the Royale, the giant skeleton back again. Let me donate the other first. Donate, golds and golds and golds. Lots of gold. Pekka, lightning, Skarmy, phrase, balloon, friends. My daily donation is 240 out of 260, and now I have one giant skeleton left. And whoa, it's not donating. Whoa, a camon bichar. Even Supercell is confused maybe because they can't even handle my 48 accounts. Okay, you can see these are my card collections, the epics. Look, all my epics are full. They are either 20 out of 20 or more than that. Majority of the epics except the level 5 ones. And why I did this, I'll be discussing this on the next video, but I always keep my cards full. There is a strategy behind it. Well, let me open the chest first, the free chest. Both of the free chests are really free, nothing that much of importance. Now let's open the crown chest. Gold, gems, minions, minion horde. Minion horde is in my main deck. Okay, before challenge, let me open the custom tournament. This is just a random 500 gems tournament. I just created for filling all the chests actually. Oh, nothing that much. Waste of 5k gems. Sorry, not 5k gems, 500 gems. Okay, now let me open the crown chest. Nothing of that as well. Only 4 Valkyries. The magical chest, please. Let me get a legendary here. Nothing. Clone, bomber, wizard. The last one is not epic, so it's not legendary. Balloon. Well, never mind. Now giant chest. A clone. That means no legendary. I'll be getting some commons at last. Oh, minion horde. It's good for my deck. Before the super magical chest, let me open the grand challenge chest. Hopefully there is a legendary this time. 17.5k gold, that's a lot. Barbarian hearts, skeletons, archers, barbarians, Fireball, Tesla, arrows, Inferno, that was needed, Bomb Tower, useless, Ice Spirit, since no epic, so no legendary, Poor Luck, oh golem, that's nice, 9 golems will be quite handy later on. So this is it. At last I will open the SMC. Please, I need a legendary now. If I get 23 epics before the last card, here is already 4 epics, then I'll be getting a legendary. 4 epics, then Barbarian Heart, Barbarians, whoa, that's nice. The Bowler, 4 plus 7, it's 11 epics already. Goblin Heart, yes, 12 epics, that means in 23, the last one is definitely a legendary. Here it goes, guys. Princess, cute. Well, never mind, I would be happier if I got a graveyard, but it doesn't matter. So here it is. I have opened all my chests. These are all my card collection, my deck. You see the graveyard is level 3. Hopefully I'll be taking it to level 4 as soon as possible, and I'll be discussing all the strategies and tactics, why I have filled all the cards. Why didn't I upgrade? There is a well, let me buy the bandit first. I have bought the bandit, so it is also full. In the next video I will be discussing why I have all those cards stacked with me, why I haven't upgraded. There is a tactics. I will be discussing about all the tactics, and here it is. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed my video. So if you, the one who are lazy people, I'm saying this is a special offer for you. Please subscribe to my channel, like my video, and leave a comment behind. In the comment, from the comment, and who have done all of these 3, I'll be selecting 2 lucky people each week who will be visiting to my clan, and I'll be letting them donate and earn 24k gold. So that's it. Thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe to my channel. I'll be posting a lot of videos on strategies and lots of other things, and I need your full support while doing it. Thank you. This is Toxic Group.